So there's this question that at first seems really easy to answer, but then when you start thinking about it, you soon discover it's not easy at all. It's really difficult, surreal even. The question is this: what is history? My name is Jonathan Seyfried, and this is The Historian's Notebook, a podcast about how history gets made. So let's talk about that question again. What is history? And why is this podcast going to be doing something different with the subject of history? All right. Well, if you look at a lot of historical content out there, whether it's a podcast or a movie or a book written by a scholar who is credentialed at some university, or a historical fiction novel, or a Netflix series, there's all kinds of history out there. So we can talk about what is history in terms of all the different formats that it could be. But where does it come from? Like, how is it that we get these varieties of products that all take us to some place in the past using our imagination, really, as viewers, listeners, or readers? History is stuff that happened, right? And in some ways, it seems like it should be a pretty simple thing because it's in the past, so it can't be changed. And therefore, it's gotta just be all about recovery, right? Let's just go find it. But when you really start getting into the question of what happened in the past, what you really start to confront is that we have, in some situations, a lot of information, and in other situations, hardly any information. And so, how is it that we can construct what happened in the past in some kind of narrative format, in some kind of story? How does that happen? How do people, whether they're a novelist writing historical fiction or a scholar going into the archives and looking at hundreds of documents from the past, how do they decide what story they're going to tell? This is a really difficult set of choices that everybody who works with history has to make, because you can't just record every single thing. That would be impossible. And on the other hand, you can't just stick to only the facts, because what's in between the facts can really be super important and the heart of the human experience. For example, if you come across some document that says in such and such year and in such land, a great pestilence took hold. Well, you've got the information that there was some kind of disease that happened at that time and place. But that's not really what we're looking for when we're trying to get into history. What we're looking for is some kind of understanding of what it meant. What did it mean to be in that land at that time, dealing with whatever disease that was? That's what we're really looking for, not just the fact that a disease outbreak happened. We're looking for the experience. And in order to get at that, it requires some imagination, for sure, but it also requires some judgment calls, at times really tough judgment calls. And that's where the heart of this podcast is really going to be. The Historian's Notebook will give you an in-depth look at how professional historians, those whose job it is to present with their training and expertise a narrative of something that happened in the past, how they go about making those judgment calls. So we're going to, in the course of this podcast series, explore all kinds of different times and places. And we're going to see not just how historians have come up with these conclusions that at times can be extremely surprising, but we're also going to see how, in many ways, the work of a historian with all their expertise will inevitably involve mistakes and errors and guesses that turn out to be wrong, but those never really make it into the final product. Of course, there'd not really be a whole lot of reason to include that in the final product, because the whole job of an expert is to say, look, I have used my expertise in order to arrive at some kind of conclusion that can be trusted. That's the result of my expertise. So you don't want to go through a whole litany of things that you got wrong if you're having that goal. So a lot of the errors, the guesses, all of that, where actually a lot of the real interaction with history takes place, it gets hidden. And this podcast has a different approach. The goal, strangely, is to expose the errors and the mistakes at the same time as you get to watch somebody, me, try to develop a level of understanding and expertise regarding something that had happened in the past. And sometimes, with some subjects, it feels a little bit easier or a little bit more difficult. But the reasons for that can be pretty surprising. The podcast is going to run for a few seasons. And on the first season, we're going to journey to the 14th century in the Crown of Aragon, what is today a part of Spain. And we're going to look at gender dynamics on the part of a particular king and queen. Later seasons will feature places as far away as India and as close, to me at least, as Roswell. So stick around and keep coming back to check to see what new seasons have to offer. But the first one is going to be something. And so look out for the season trailer for the first season of The Historian's Notebook. The title of that season is Molt Cara Companiona.